Hi everybody, and welcome to tonight's video where we will be talking about angles and parallel lines. So yesterday, separately, we introduced the concept of parallel lines and the concept of a transversal. And when a transversal cut two lines, it formed these different types of angle relationships: corresponding angles, alternate interior, consecutive interior, and alternate exterior angles. So we just talked about that in general. But what we're going to do now is talk about what happens when that transversal is cutting two parallel lines. Well, special things happen among those angles. So in the diagram here, I have my transversal line A cuts the two parallel lines B and C. And remember, our little symbol to show that two lines are parallel is a solid triangle or arrow filled in. So in this picture, I noticed that B and C are cut by a transversal. They're both parallel. And now there's going to be special relationships among these different angles. And so remember, there's four angles cut at each intersection. And these ones all have different special relationships. So the first thing that we're going to look at are the corresponding angles. So remember, corresponding angles were the angles that were in the same position at the two different intersections. So angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding, 2 and 6 are corresponding, 3 and 7 are in the same spot, they're corresponding, 4 and 8, those are corresponding. If I look at the picture, I can kind of tell what the relationship is. They all are congruent. So corresponding angles are congruent when a transversal cuts two parallel lines. So that means angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 7. And angle 4 is congruent to angle 8. So I know that relationship occurs in this diagram. Now, alternate interior angles. So the interior angles are the angles that are between the two parallel lines, and alternate interior means they're on opposite sides. So 4 and 6, and 3 and 5, okay? And alternate interior angles are also going to be congruent. And the reason for that is angle 4 we know is congruent to angle 8, right? Because we just said that up here with corresponding angles. Then angle 8 and angle 6 are congruent because they're vertical angles, and we know that those two types of angles are congruent. So by the transitive property, we know that angle 4 and angle 6 are congruent. So I can say angle 4 is congruent to angle 6, right? So alternate interior angles, that's how we know they're congruent. And then angle 3 then is also congruent to angle 5. So we can prove this with a little bit of transitive property and some other postulates we already know. But this is just the relationship that develops there. Now, consecutive interior angles. Remember, we said consecutive, another word for that is same side. So that means the two interior angles that are on the same side of the transversal. So 4 and 5 are consecutive, and 3 and 6 are consecutive. Remember from our first one, the corresponding angles. So 2 and 6 would be congruent. And 2 and 3 make a linear pair. So that means 3 is supplementary to 2, right? Because between the two of them, their sum would be 180. So if 2 is congruent to 6, and 3 is supplementary to 2, then another way to say that is that 3 is supplementary to 6. So consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So that means the sum of their measures equals 180. So the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180 degrees. And the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 5 also equals 180 degrees. And the last relationship we're going to look at are the alternate exterior angles. So alternate means they're on the opposite sides, and exterior means they're outside of the parallel lines. So 1 and 7 are alternate exterior, and 2 and 8 are alternate exterior, And again, with a little bit of transitive property and what we already know about vertical angles, we can say that these angles are congruent. So angle 2 is congruent to angle 8, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 7 in this picture here. Okay, so basically the relationships are either congruent or supplementary. And so what we're going to do with this are a few examples, and basically the examples that we're going to use are always going to be given the measure of one angle. So let's say we're given that the measure of angle 1 is, let's say, 120 degrees. Okay? From that, I can find the measure of any of these other angles. So if I'm given the measure of angle 1, and let's say we want to find the measure of angle 5, we're going to use our relationships from the previous page. So looking back here, I want to determine if they're corresponding, alternate interior, consecutive interior, or alternate exterior. And then they'll either be congruent, supplementary, or congruent. So 1 and 5 in this picture here are corresponding angles, right? Because they're in the same position. And so from our previous page, we know that corresponding angles are congruent. So I can say the measure of angle 5 equals 120 degrees. What about the measure of angle 7? So looking at this picture, 1 and 7, those happen to be alternate exterior angles. So I would flip back in my page and I would look, what are alternate exterior angles? They are congruent. So if they're congruent, their measures are the same, so the measure of angle 7 is 120 degrees. Okay, what about the measure of angle 2? In this case, 1 and 2 make a linear pair, so adding them together, I would know that they are supplementary. So the measure of angle 2 equals 180 minus 120. And so that is 60 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at all of these angles here, and they're either going to fit one of the relationships from my previous page. They're either going to be corresponding and thus congruent, alternate interior, incongruent, consecutive interior, supplementary, alternate exterior, congruent, or they could be, you know, like a linear pair, like angle 1 and 2, so that means they form a line, so that means supplementary. Or they could be vertical angles, like 1 and 3, which means congruent. So basically, in all of these cases, I'm either going to be stating that the angles are congruent, so their measures are going to be the same, or their measures are going to be supplementary, so they are going to be 60. So you could really, once you find the measure of one angle, you can fill in the measures for all of the other 8 angles using some properties that we already know, and those angles will all either be congruent or supplementary to whatever you're given for a measure. So then, you know, that's pretty easy. Let's complicate things a little bit. What if we say the measure of angle 1 equals, let's say 2x plus 10, and the measure of angle 3 equals 3x minus 5, and we want to find x. Well, in that case, what we would do is look at the relationship. Angle 1 and angle 3, those are vertical angles, so we know that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3, right, because they're vertical angles here. So I could say 2x plus 10 equals 3x minus 5. And so we would just solve for x now, right? And we can say they're equal because they are vertical. So subtract 2x from each side and get the x's together. And so we have 10 equals x minus 5. And now we would add 5 to each side. And we would get x equals 15. Or you could say 15 equals x here. Okay, so we will also use these relationships to solve some algebra. So it could either be vertical angles, or again, might be supplementary, or might be congruent, depending on one of the other relationships, as if they're alternate exterior or corresponding or something like that. So we'll do some more practice problems that look like this tomorrow. We'll make them a little more complicated. Maybe we'll throw multiple lines in here that are all parallel, so you have a lot more angles to deal with. Or maybe, sometimes they just draw it where it's like a segment and you don't see the rest of the line going off forever, so you have to like kind of continue the line. But we're going to do an example like that to start class tomorrow. And so bring these notes. Your notes from this video and then the notes from the video before will also be helpful. And we'll do some problems then together in class tomorrow. Have a great night.